All right, so we've got this big stack of articles here all about this 4B movement in South Korea.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff.
I mean, it's really taken off lately.
Yeah, especially I feel like here in the US after Trump got reelected.
It seems like it's resonating with a lot of people.
Yeah,
No dating, no marriage, no sex, no childbirth with men. It's a pretty big statement.
definitely.
I mean, it's, a lot of women are like, I'm out of here. I'm done.
Yeah. It's almost like, it's more than just a protest. It's like they're really trying to create a whole new way of life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So where did this all start? I mean, these articles mention like online feminist communities, movements like Escape the Corset, things like that. Is that where 4B kind of came out of?
Yeah, I think so. You have to think about like mid-2010s South Korea. Online, you have all these spaces where women are, you know, pushing back against expectations, beauty standards, all of that.
Right.
And then you have South Korea's #MeToo movement.
Oh, yeah, that was huge.
That was really gaining traction, really exposing like the downsides of all the gender dynamic.
For sure.
And so 4B kind of comes out of this, potent mix of frustration and activism.
It's interesting how the articles tie this all to South Korea's like crazy economic transformation too.
Yeah.
It's like all this progress, but it also kind of created this pressure cooker where women are expected to like, kill it at work, but then still fit into those old school roles.
Right. Yeah, and it is kind of a paradox because you have South Korea's economic miracle, but that led to a lot of competition. And for some men, that meant like holding on to those patriarchal norms even tighter.
Makes sense.
And you can see that reflected in the gender pay gap. Women are making a lot less. I mean, it's like 31% less than men.
Wow, that's a huge difference. And it's not just about money, is it?
No.
The articles talk about a lot of scary stuff, like intimate partner violence. And there's just this feeling that, like, the whole system's rigged against women.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like this feeling of being trapped, exploited, and constantly judged. And, one of the articles even mentions this national birth map. It was launched by the government back in 2016. I guess it like visualized the number of women of reproductive age in each district.
Okay.
It was like the government was reducing women down to just their, biological function.
Yikes.
And it just fueled the outrage.
No wonder women are like, enough, we're done. And it makes sense why they're turning to 4B as a way to kind of reclaim their lives. I mean, the articles share some pretty powerful stories. Like young Wimmy, she's a nurse. She found all this freedom by just rejecting those beauty standards that were weighing her down.
Right.
And then there's Yeowon. She straight up sees marriage as like a threat to her well-being.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening in Korea. I mean, their experiences really make this movement feel real. It's not just an idea,
Yeah, those stories are important. They show why women are making this, what seems like a radical choice. Like, take Minji. She felt like men expected to be treated like a king. Oh, wow.
Or Soyeon, the teacher, who doesn't think she'll ever find a Korean man who doesn't expect his wife to just take on the traditional roles. So these aren't just, abstract ideas. These are real women making tough choices.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like the 4B movement is this direct response to feeling trapped. Like, the system just doesn't value women the same way.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what's it actually like to live this way? The articles mention challenges, but there's also this, like, real sense of community among 4B women.
Right. It's interesting. It's like, imagine choosing to opt out of the traditional path,
Yeah,
but in a society that's built around it.
exactly.
Like the gender pay gap is a huge issue. A lot of these women have to take on multiple jobs.
Oh, for sure.
And then there's the social isolation,
Yeah.
judgment from family and friends,
Yep.
the people who don't get it.
Yeah, it sounds really tough, like swimming upstream.
It is. But the articles also talk about these amazing support systems 4B women are creating.
Right, there's that too. There's this resilience and innovation. They're forming these online communities, sharing job leads, giving financial advice.
Wow.
They're even making maps of women-owned businesses
They're so cool.
just to support each other. There's even a subgroup called WITH, stands for Women in the Hell.
Oh, wow. I like that.
They're focused on economic empowerment. It's like they're building this whole parallel society where they can thrive
It's amazing.
on their own terms.
Yeah, it's really impressive.
It is, yeah. It's really cool to see. It shows just how strong and determined these women are. They're not just like saying no to the system.
Yeah.
They're actually building something new.
Yeah. And this whole idea of self-reliance, it's catching on globally. I mean, the articles mentioned how there's been this surge in interest in the 4B movement here in the U.S., especially after Trump's reelection.
Makes sense.
It's like women here are relating to that core message of, being fed up and angry.
Yeah, I think the parallels are there, for sure. The gender pay gap, feeling unheard, undervalued, and like this backlash against all the progress feminists have made, those are all issues that resonate everywhere.
For sure.
But the question is, can a movement like 4B, something that came out of Korea, really take root in a different culture like the US?
That's a really good point.
Uh,
I mean, the articles do talk about some key differences to think about.
mm,
Like in South Korea, marriage has a lot more weight, socially and economically.
right.
Choosing to not get married there is a much bigger deal than it is in the US.
Exactly. Like in Korea, not being married can actually hurt you socially and even economically.
It's true.
But in the US, even though marriage is still a thing, people are more open to other ways of life. So choosing 4B means different things and has different consequences depending on where you are.
Yeah. So it makes you wonder if 4B, like in its pure form, is more about Korea's specific anxieties rather than a global answer to inequality.
I think it's possible. The articles do point out some of the arguments happening within the movement itself that kind of highlight that tension. Like, can 4B women be friends with men?
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
What about women who date men? And then there's the question of, are they inclusive of trans women? The sources seem to say some 4B communities are not.
Yeah, that really jumped out at me, too. It's like even within a movement that's all about liberation, there can be these blind spots.
Yeah. I think it just shows that no social movement is perfect. 4B is still figuring things out.
Right.
These debates are a good sign. It means they're grappling with tough questions about identity, inclusivity, and how to exist in a world that wasn't made for them.
And it makes you think, can they keep up this radical stance? The articles talked about some women who practice what they call selective feminism, meaning they're all about 4B when they're with their 4B friends, but in other parts of their lives, they might just go along with the traditional expectations.
Yeah, that's interesting. It shows how tough it is to keep rejecting those norms day in and day out.
Mm.
As life changes, people's priorities might change too. They might meet someone new, 4B might not be as appealing.
So could it be that 4B, even though it's really powerful and makes you think, is kind of a temporary thing?
Yeah.
Like a burst of resistance that gets people talking and pushes for small changes?
It's a good question. The sources don't have a clear answer, but they do point out some trends that suggest how we view relationships and gender roles is changing. For example, the articles mention this thing called the 6B4T movement in China. It takes the 4B principles and adds no buying and no working to the mix.
Wow, that's even more radical.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like there's a growing disillusionment with consumerism and all the demands of capitalism.
Right. And that's something that resonates all over the world, not just in Korea.
For sure.
And then there's this trend of young people globally choosing celibacy. It's happening across genders. It seems like people are questioning the old relationship models and wanting more freedom and self-discovery.
It's like we're seeing people rethink what it means to be in a relationship, what intimacy means, how to build a life in this world that's constantly changing. It's exciting, but it's also kind of scary.
Absolutely. 4B came out of a specific place, but it's tapped into something bigger. This global conversation about gender, equality, and finding freedom in a world that can feel very limiting.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really makes you think. And it definitely challenges you to see the world differently.
It does. It really does. But I'm kind of curious about like the practical side of things. Let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, wow, 4B is really interesting. What can they actually do?
That's a great question. And I think it's important to remember that you don't have to adopt every single part of 4B to be inspired by it.
Right.
At its heart, it's about more autonomy and equality for women, and there are a lot of ways to support that.
So it's not about everyone swearing off marriage and kids, but more about, pushing for that bigger change.
Exactly. It starts with awareness. Learn about the issues driving this movement. The pay gap, the lack of affordable childcare, all those traditional roles that are still hanging on.
Yeah.
And then see what you can do in your own community.
Like those online communities the articles mentioned, women helping each other out, supporting each other's businesses.
Yeah.
Are there things like that happening locally that people could join?
Oh, absolutely. There are tons of organizations working to help women, fighting for their rights and economic empowerment. You can volunteer, donate to a cause, or even just start conversations about this stuff with your friends and family.
Right. It's like recognizing that change can happen in different ways, from what we do individually to those big shifts in society.
Exactly. And movements like 4B, even if you don't agree with everything, they can really get those conversations going.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. It's amazing how a movement that started in South Korea can spark these discussions all over the world about gender, relationships, a more equal future.
Yeah. It shows how connected we all are and how powerful ideas can be. They can cross any border. 4B may not have all the answers, but it definitely raises the right questions.
So as we wrap things up, is there like one big takeaway you'd want our listeners to think about?
I'd say think about what's important to you. What do you want your life to look like? Are you happy with how things are? Or are you looking for something more?
Yeah.
4B might not be for everyone, but it makes you think about those questions. It makes you imagine different ways of living, different ways of relating to each other.
It reminds us that we have the power to choose our own path and create a world where everyone can thrive, no matter their gender, background, or relationship status.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And the conversation doesn't end here. Keep asking questions, keep challenging the norms, and keep fighting for a better, more fulfilling future for everyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the 4B movement. We hope you found it interesting and maybe even inspiring. Until next time.